Welcome to our special coverage on Lebanon, where the situation has reached a critical point. As tensions escalate, the Israeli military's operations in Gaza also intensify, further complicating the regional landscape. We follow these developments closely, examining the impact on Lebanon and its people as they navigate this volatile period of uncertainty.
منطقة سكنية لا فيها أشياء عسكرية ولا فيها شيء. مثل أول شيء أنا عاجز وبدي أهرب.
In a country of that size, which is relatively small, and a population that's estimated around 5 million people, you can imagine how dramatic it is. Over 1 million people are now without shelter and on the move.
We start with the development in Lebanon, where the Israeli occupation military has announced it began a wave of airstrikes on the coastal city of Tyre in southern Lebanon. The attack comes after the army issued evacuation orders for at least 15 buildings earlier today. Today, the initial strikes happened to the relatively early hours of the morning. Following the evacuation threats, there was another round of strikes in the afternoon. Smoke has risen from the ruins of a destroyed building in Younis, a neighborhood on the edge of Beirut suburbs, as residents sifted through rubble following an Israeli airstrike the early before. An Israeli airstrike flattened the buildings near one of the Beirut's busiest traffic junctions yesterday, shaking the Lebanese capital as Israel kept up its intensified bombardment. In one of several airstrikes on Friday morning, the attack struck near the Younis junction, more central target than most of what Israel has hit. The U.S. ambassador to Lebanon has submitted a draft truce proposal to Lebanon's Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri. This marks Washington's first written proposal in several weeks to halt the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. The U.S. has been working to broker a ceasefire to end the hostilities, but efforts have yet to yield results. And for further analysis on the current negotiations in Lebanon, we are joined from Beirut by the advisor to Lebanon Information Minister, Misbah Al-Ali. Good evening to you and welcome to Qnews. Now, what has been Lebanon's initial reaction to the content of the American draft proposal, and how aligned is it with Lebanon's national interests?
Greetings, everybody. In fact, the United States has taken initiative to reach or to bring forth a ceasefire. And in fact, this draft agreement has been provided or presented to the Deputy Prime Minister, who is now convening a lot of parties on the Lebanese arena, including Hezbollah. But in fact, there are some considerations that he is trying to take into consideration, like, for instance, the abiding by the provisions of the Security Council Resolution number 1701. And as well, there is an Israeli demand which is requesting the convening of a committee to monitor the execution of the provisions of the Security Council number 1701. And the Lebanese authorities consider this a breach to their sovereignty because, in fact, when an international community monitors these matters, this is a breach to the Lebanese sovereignty. This is the major obstacle that is standing before reaching a final agreement. But the agreement is now 90% done, and if a consensus is reached on that agreement, then we'll find that a major issue regarding the Israeli aggression is solved. But after that is going to come another phase, which has to do with the launching of a ceasefire and the operationalization of the Security Council Resolution number 1701.
Now, from your point of view, do you see these negotiations as a potential step towards a comprehensive peace process, or are they primarily aimed at managing the conflict with short-term measures?
In fact, Lebanon's commitment to the Security Council Resolution number 1701 started in 2006 after the July aggression took place. But there were violations that took place from the Israeli end, which led to a lot of tumultuous circumstances, and this in fact is a breach of the Lebanese authorities' sovereignty over the Lebanese territories. Once more, the underscoring of 1701 resolution is something very important for the Lebanese state. But what the Israelis want is to deviate from applying this resolution. And they want to bring a lot of amendments to the body of this resolution, but this is in fact illegal according to international law. And I don't think that the United States or even some European countries are ready to get into a phase to ratify a new law or a new resolution to bring a ceasefire in Lebanon. Right now, they just want to operationalize the resolution number 1701. And I would like to refer to something else. There is a transition now taking place. Specifically in the light of the change of the American administration. In fact, this transition might result in an Israeli systematic aggression, specifically that the Israeli offensives have been targeting civilian centers in Bika in the south or in the southern Dahia suburb. The Israeli occupation forces have been targeting civilian buildings and infrastructure institutions in order to breach once more the Lebanese sovereignty over the Lebanese territories.
But there is an American proposal that has been submitted. Do you think that the discussions between the Lebanese officials and the U.S. representatives has influenced in a way or another the current draft of this American proposal?
In fact, the Lebanese side is on board with the American draft proposal to operationalize the Security Council Resolution 1701 because this resolution guarantees security for Lebanese nationals. But on the other hand, Israel keeps on escalating and targeting civilian venues. And so the American-Lebanese negotiations are now being circulated, and there are a lot of deliberations on the operationalization of the Security Council Resolution number 1701 as is, without bringing into it any further margins or any further amendments that the Israelis are trying to add to the original body of the resolution. Like, for instance, they want to give themselves the space to militarily intervene in Lebanon when they perceive some kind of a breach taking place to the provisions of the Security Council Resolution number 1701. But the Lebanese side once more wants to apply the resolution as is. And in fact, there are units deployed by the United Nations that are now deployed on the borders between Lebanon and Palestine. And this is actually part of the resolution, and the Lebanese are on board with that.
Right, that was the advisor to Lebanon, Information Minister Musbah El Ali. Thank you so much for your insights here. And back to what we were covering, and the Lebanese death toll from Israel's onslaught since October 7th, 2023 is climbed to 3,452 with over 14,664 people injured. According to the Lebanese ministry, yesterday's toll include the death of 7 and injury of 65 as a result of the aggression on the country. Israeli forces continue to strike Beirut's southern suburbs. Now, the Israeli occupation army has reported that approximately 65 rockets have been identified crossing from Lebanon into Israel's western Jalili area. The army added that sirens sounded this morning due to the projectiles, and some of the rockets were intercepted. It did not elaborate on the status of the other rockets. And to Gaza, where Jewish settlers have torched cause agricultural structures and damaged residents' belongings during an attack on the Palestinian town of Beit Furik near Nablus in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Jewish settlers' violence against Palestinian communities in the West Bank has drawn condemnation internationally and led to sanctions on violent settlers by some governments, notably the United States, which has urged Israel to do more to stop the attacks. Five civilians have been killed and others have been injured in the bombing of the Palestinian side of Rafah city, south of the Gaza Strip, by the Israeli occupation warplanes. Medical sources reported that 3 young men were killed and others were injured when an occupation drone bombed a group warplane in the Khirbet al-Ats area north of the city. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has led to a devastating humanitarian crisis, displacing over 1.9 million people with limited resources and escalating violence. International support is urgently needed to alleviate suffering.
The ongoing conflict in Gaza has triggered a humanitarian crisis, with thousands of residents left stranded and displaced. As violence intensifies, many families are fleeing their homes, seeking safety in increasingly overcrowded areas. The United Nations has warned that over 1.9 million people in Gaza have been forced from their homes since the start of the conflict, with no clear destination for many of them. Humanitarian agencies are struggling to provide adequate aid due to severe restrictions on the ground, making it difficult to access those in need. Gaza's infrastructure is crumbling under the pressure of continued airstrikes and blockades, and with hospitals overwhelmed, access to basic services is becoming scarce. The UN, Human Rights Watch, and other organizations are calling for urgent international support, but the situation remains dire. With limited places to shelter and no guarantee of safety, many people are trapped in a cycle of displacement, facing the daily threat of violence and the growing shortage of food, water, and medical care. The long-term implications for Gaza's population are devastating, and the international community continues to demand immediate action to alleviate the suffering of those caught in the conflict.
For further analysis on the situation in Gaza, we're joined from Ramallah by Secretary General of the International Academic Campaign Against the Israeli Occupation and Apartheid, Dr. Ramzi Auda. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews. So, what are the reasons behind the demolition of Al Bustan Association headquarters in Silwan, and how does this contribute to ethnic cleansing in the area?
In fact, a couple of days back, Israel demolished Al Bustan Charity Association, which is a cultural, sports, and educational association that serves the Al Quds students and students from Al Silwan region. It is located near the Al-Aqsa Mosque as well. Israel claims that these buildings in the Silwan district are not licensed. And, this association was established back in 2004, and it has been receiving a lot of aid from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by a lot of other French organizations that are 20 plus. This association once more presents cultural, educational, and sports services for Palestinian students. In fact, Israel does not grant construction licenses in a lot of areas in Palestine, specifically in Al-Quds, and it imposes very high fines and penalties on the Palestinians in order to prevent them from constructing any new establishments. And then, after the flood of Al-Aqsa, or the 7th of October incidents, we found that, Israel has been demolishing a lot of Palestinian buildings in Al-Quds and in a lot of areas around of it. What is happening in Al-Silwan is clear apartheid. And in fact, Israel has taken over a lot of buildings, and around more than 80% or more than 80 housing blocks right now are being taken over by Israeli settlers because they consider the Silwan district, the city of Prophet David. And so these settlers, they have faith-based or creed aspirations, and for that matter, the Israeli authority tries to displace these Jewish settlers into this area that they consider epicenter or the cradle of the Prophet David.
Mm-hmm. How do demolition and displacement policies impact the demographic, cultural character of Jerusalem?
In fact, Al-Quds or Jerusalem has been in fact suffering from a movement of Judaism or giving a Judaic imbuement to these areas in a lot of districts in Jerusalem. Once more, the Israelis impose a lot of fines on the Palestinians, and that leads a lot of Jerusalem nationals to exit and get displaced from Al-Quds or Jerusalem in order to live outside of it and on its suburbs. They do that in order to be able to construct some housing buildings for themselves. And in fact, the families that are living in Jerusalem right now, they are just families, small families, and this does not give any area for demographic expansion to take place, Palestinian demographic expansion to take place in Jerusalem. We now have around 500,000 Israeli settlers living in Al-Quds or Jerusalem, and right now there are entire cities and districts inside of Al-Quds or Jerusalem that are completely populated by Jews, and these areas together are named the Greater Jerusalem or Greater Al-Quds. And for that matter, once more, a lot of Jerusalem nationals are actually being displaced outside of Al-Quds or Jerusalem, and we can project that the number of Jews residing in Jerusalem are going to be much higher than the Palestinians residing there.
Now, does the shortage of food and fuel aid in Younis signal a bigger crisis in Gaza's humanitarian situation? And how do you assess the international community's response so far to such crisis?
It's not just in Younis, Deir al-Bala, Saraj as well. These southern cities are facing the same issue. They are scarce on food. And if we get into other regions like the north of Jabalia, Zaytun, Beit Laya, Beit Hanun, what is happening there is a downright starvation in the fullest sense of the word. And the Palestinian nationals are being expelled out of these areas in order for them to resort to other southern regions. And what's happening is an unprecedented apartheid, in fact. And this is actually the second Nakba, as we call it, because, the food products don't reach the Palestinians for a number of reasons. Like, for instance, the exiting of the Rafah corridor, and Israel keeps on speaking about the opening of northern corridors.
Yes,
but in fact, this
we
is
do
not
understand.
At all true. The humanitarian aid didn't exceed 100 trucks on a daily basis.
Yes, it's very clear what's going on, and definitely photos and videos show. That was Secretary General of the International Academic Campaign Against the Israeli Occupation and Apartheid, Dr. Ramzi Auda. Thank you so much for your insights here, and this concludes our special coverage for today. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.